Wow. Whew. Man, what a morning. Well, hey, I want to welcome you here this morning. My name is Brett. I'm the lead pastor here at New Life Church. And if I have not had the opportunity to meet you yet, I would love to do that and to hear your story. We are coming together on Labor Day weekend. Aww. As positive as we try to make it, it's still the unofficial end to summer. Or, right, the beginning of fall. Yeah. Okay. There's some excitement. Or we can take it the next step further and look a little farther out and say it's the unofficial beginning of the countdown to winter. Christmas. No, not winter. Christmas. Anybody tell me how many days from this day right now till Christmas? Anybody at all? I got a prize for you, a free Bible, if you can tell me. Anything? 114 days. 114 days from right now till Christmas. Yes! We're already planning for it. Can you believe that? We talked about it this week. Christmas is coming. What are we going to do? How are we going to handle it? Which is what I love about Labor Day weekend. Labor Day weekend is an opportunity, much like New Year's, where you can look into the future. It's kind of the beginning again, right? One time a year is coming to an end. A new time is beginning. School is starting. There's a lot of stuff that's taking place for us to look into the future. I enjoy looking into the future. And so today's message, we're talking about looking ahead. And what does it mean to look ahead, and where are we looking, and why are we looking there? And one of the things you can do to look ahead is very short term. Open up one of these. We've got a lot of things coming up. We've got a lot of different activities you can be a part of. There's classes that are starting. Two that I want to highlight this morning are cancer care class that's beginning and our spiritual gifts class that are beginning next week. There are limited spaces available for those classes, and I think both those classes are going to have a big impact. Not that all the others won't, but those specifically, the cancer care one, there is a huge need for that right here within this church, but more so outside of our walls as well. There are people all over the place that are dealing with cancer diagnosis, or family or friends that have individuals that are going through cancer or have lost individuals to that. And so as a church, we want to make an impact in that. And so there's limited spots available. So register online if you're interested in doing that. You can have a huge impact in that area. And the other one is spiritual gifts. We're starting a new series coming up, and our hope is that through the series next week, that every single one of us will have a little bit of a better understanding of spiritual gifts specifically, but even more so our spiritual gifts individually. So you as an individual, how has God gifted you? And the spiritual gifts class is a way that you can go to that next level and say, okay, what specifically are mine as an individual, and then what do I do with them? And we're going to incorporate that into all of our classes starting next week, so we can know as individuals that we are gifted, that God has given us something that we can use. For what purpose? Why? What does that look like? Come back next week and find out. We'll be talking about it for a number of weeks going forward. But today we are looking ahead. And we're looking ahead at what God has for us and His challenge for us, not just in the short term, but in the long run. And one of the things I want to talk about is, as we look ahead, is what is success? As we look at our classes, as we're laying things out for the future, as we're thinking about Christmas, we have goals in mind. We have things we'd like to accomplish. We have stuff that we want to see happen. We have this idea of what success is. But if you were to ask yourself today, what is success? What would you say? As you look at your goals for your life, what defines success? I can remember when I was young, it was winning trophies, right? I was competitive, and I wanted to be the very best at everything I possibly could be. And so I was involved in this thing called run, punt, and pass. And it was a football competition, and it was very simple. You ran as fast as you possibly could, you kicked a football as far as you possibly could, and you threw a football as far as you possibly could. And whoever could do all those things combined within this formula won. And I got a number of trophies. And I remember as a little kid holding that trophy going, I've made it. In fact, one time, I actually won a competition to where I got to go onto the field at halftime of the Iowa State football game, and they announced my name. I was a big deal. And yet, you know where those trophies are today? They're in a box somewhere in storage. I haven't looked at them for years. You know another funny part of that? I never played a football game in my life. In fact, I've never put on pads. I've never hit anybody. I've never worn a helmet. I've never done any of that. And yet at that age, when I was a kid, that was what success was. Well, transition, I then started playing sports, a different sport, and I ended up going to college, and I got to college and had all these successes along the way, but really thought that, okay, if this isn't it, then this has to be it. And I kept pouring myself into all these things. I realized basketball was coming to an end, so I'm like, I better make something of myself. I better study hard. So I poured myself into studying while playing and ended up winning a plaque, which at the time I was, again, extremely proud of. In fact, I want to show you. I got a picture of it. This right here, I became academic all-conference because I applied myself and thought that being done or getting one of those was it, right? Again, I held that just like that trophy when I was 7. Success. And I was so excited because when I graduated, I was going to go into all these interviews and I was going to be able to tell them, do you know who I am? Look at what I have done. It's pretty awesome. Guess how many people in the interviews, it was right there on my resume. Like I made sure I bolded it down in accomplishments at the very bottom. It was there. Guess how many people asked me about being academic all-conference at San Jose State? None. None. It was so frustrating, all this hard work that I'd put into. As I'd played football, I never actually played football, right? As I studied all this stuff, nobody even cared what my GPA was. They didn't care I was academic all-conference. None of this stuff even mattered. It was really sad. Was that success? Maybe. I would say those were successes, right? Those taught me a lot. They built into me who I am today. But if I were to look at those moments, would I call that success? The answer would have to be no, it's not. It wasn't success because honestly, we all know it, our lives aren't over yet, right? My life has not ended. And so for me to be able to say that my life has been a success, I can't make that statement yet. Because I believe that success is this. It's a compilation of everything that we have done over time, right? It's everything put together that we can look at and say, was I a success? And I believe it can only be measured when everything is said and done. Now, do we have periodic successes? Yes. Were those trophies symbols of hard work? Was this plaque something that I had earned, that I had achieved? Was that a success? Yes. And I think those push us in the right direction, but complete success cannot be measured to the very end. One of my favorite sayings says this: the victor isn't the one who's winning in the 7th inning. The victor isn't the one who's winning in the 7th inning. Now, if you were to look at a baseball game and ask the question, which inning is most important, you'd have to make the argument that every single one of them is most important, right? If you don't have a good start, if you don't have a good 2nd inning, if you don't have a good 7th inning, right? If you come out of the 7th inning stretch and you're tired and you lose it in the 8th and 9th, do you end up winning in the end? The answer is no. You have to put them all together. But can you have bad innings and make up for it later in the game? The answer is yes. Do all the innings have to be great? No. But the very end is when you finally understand, did I win or not? It's not over till it's over. So what is success? I define it this way. Success is finishing well and having a lasting impact. As we look at our classes, as we think about Christmas coming up, as we think about all these things, it's just a piece of the puzzle that we're putting together to get to the very end. To say that we want periodic successes, but at the same time, what we're hoping for is success in the long run. In fact, the intentionality behind all the classes is that we just don't want our classes in the fall to be really, really good. We want our classes in the fall to be a stepping stone to the next ones, to the next ones, to the next ones, so we can look back over the period of many years and say, we were successful. Why? Because we finished well and had a lasting impact. So how do I do that? How do I finish well and have a lasting impact? I want you to turn with me this morning, 1 Corinthians chapter 9, 19 through 27. We're going to go through those verses, 19 through 27, 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Open up your Bibles this morning. If you don't have one, I'd love to give you one. There's a number of them that look just like this back on the back table. If you don't like hard copy, you can download one on your app on any smart device. Just go in, type in Bible, and you'll pull one up. We use the Bible app. You can actually follow along on the slides here in your Bible app. You can save it. You can make notes. You can do whatever. Our hope throughout the course of my time here at New Life is that anybody and everybody that walks in this building will walk away with one of these. And hopefully at some point, everybody who's ever walked into this building, who's picked up one of these, gives one away as well. That you take them, that you own them, that you read them, that you use them, and that you give them away, because in this is life transformation. And our hope every time we come together is to open up the Bible, to read it, not just to gain more knowledge, but to be transformed. Because I do believe that this is the only thing in life that can transform us. It gives us a perspective and helps us in the world that we live in to be successful. So what does success look like? How do I finish well and have a lasting impact? Let's start 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 19. Though I am free and belong to no one, I've made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. I want to read that again. Though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. First point this morning, to be successful, I must focus on people. We're reading Paul here. Paul wrote most of the New Testament, a good majority of the New Testament, and Paul has many themes that go through his letters over and over and over again. But one of the largest themes through all of Paul's letters is simply this: people. It's about people. And Paul then goes on to say it's not just about people, but it's about loving people to a very high level and serving them in a way where he says here again that I've made myself a slave. A couple weeks ago, we talked about this. When we talked about serving, Paul uses this terminology regularly, that I serve those around me as a slave, that even though I am free and I belong to no one and I have no obligation to do this, I'm willing to do it to win as many people as possible. As we talked about this a couple weeks ago, the idea of slavery is something that I think each one of us wrestles with, right? It's something in our culture that we may not have experienced, but it's in our DNA as the United States. We understand it to a certain extent, and yet Paul's saying here, I'm willingly giving myself up, even though I'm free. In the United States, we are free. I'm willingly giving myself to others so that I may win as many as possible, even if I do it in a way that isn't comfortable to me. And we're going to get into that in a second. As we talked a couple weeks ago, we talked about serving in the form of slaves. And I have to tell you, I've had a number of people over the last couple of weeks say, that's made me very uncomfortable. I'm like, awesome. I'm one of those people that has been very uncomfortable with that concept, because even within me, as much as I try, there still is this sense of, I want to do what I want to do when I want to do it. And I tell you, over the last couple of weeks, I've seen two individuals who didn't know that I was watching them do this really, really well. That they submitted to somebody when they didn't necessarily have to. They were free. They could have done what they wanted to do. And yet, out of serving this individual, they said, I will submit to you and I will serve you. And I was blown away. I did not get permission from them to share their stories, and I don't even think they know that I saw them do this. And yet these last couple of weeks, I've been challenged because Paul repeatedly says this, and as we'll see here in a second, he repeatedly did this. He said, I will submit to you as a slave, even though I am free, but he clearly defines why: to win as many as possible. Number two, to be successful, I must focus on others' salvation. It's got to be about people, but it's for their salvation, which was of the utmost importance to Paul. He says, I have submitted to others. I've become a slave to them for this reason, this very reason, to win as many of them as possible. The two individuals I had the opportunity to see this past week, I don't know their intentions. I don't know why they did it, but I know that I was won over more for the gospel because of what it was that they did. That I became more passionate about getting up here on Sunday going, this really works. It's absolutely incredible. And when you do it, you're going to be winning over maybe the individual that you interact with. I'm not sure if they actually impacted the person or that person that they were submitting themselves to or serving. I'm not even sure they realized what was going on. And yet I knew, because of the context of the situation and the ability to observe and look in, exactly what was happening. I became more excited for the gospel. And so there'll be times where we're going to be serving, we'll be submitting. We don't know who's watching. We don't know what's happening. But Paul says, I did this to win as many as possible. And so my hope is that we go out to it and understand it, that we win as many as possible. That's our purpose. So how do we do it? Paul said, I submitted as a slave, and here's exactly what he did. He was focused on their salvation to win them, so here was his strategy. Verse 20, to the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but I'm under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak, I became weak to win the weak. I become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I love this passage. Paul's saying, I submitted to them as slaves for one reason, to win as many people as possible. And then he gives us very clearly what his strategy was. Here's what he did. I became all things to all people, and specifically goes into three people groups. And he says, to the Jews, I became like the Jews. And here's Paul not just teaching, here's Paul doing. Here's Paul telling us that I became like the Jews so I could reach the Jews. And in Acts 18:18, we actually see him specifically do that. So Paul still remained a good while. Then he took leave of the brethren and sailed for Syria, and Priscilla and Aquila were with him. He had his hair cut off a centuria, for he had taken a vow. It's a very peculiar verse. In fact, as you read through commentaries, many people don't know how to handle this verse, because the question is, what was Paul doing and why was he doing it? And the answer is, we don't really know. The best guess is that Paul was taking a Nazirite vow. Why would Paul take a Nazirite vow? A Nazirite vow was something he would have done as a Jew in order to get into the temple. He needed to shave his head. But Paul was a Jew, but he wasn't a Jew. He was under Christ's law, but he says, I acted like a Jew. So I ended up going to the extent of even shaving my head when I took this vow that he didn't necessarily have to take, so that I could reach those that needed to know who Jesus Christ was. How do you think Paul got into the temple? That is a question many people have asked. When Paul went into the city, he'd go into the synagogue and he'd sit there and teach. How did Paul get into the temple? If Paul wasn't a Jew anymore and he wasn't underneath the law, they probably wouldn't have let him in unless he said, I became like them so I could reach them. And that's exactly what he did. Speculation is that Paul took a vow they didn't necessarily have to take so he could be like those, and yet he wasn't under the law, but he was under God's law, and he said, I'm under God's law, not the law, so that I can reach those for the gospel. What Paul was doing was crazy, and many people probably looked at him going, you don't need to do that. You're not part of that lifestyle anymore. And he goes, yeah, I know, yet I'm willing to submit myself to them, so that I can reach them, so that some might be saved. So Paul did that on one side. On the other side, he then says that he became like the Gentiles, right? He became like those that weren't under the law, so that he could reach some that weren't under the law, and we see him doing that regularly. One of the main things he did there was the eating customs. Paul did not follow the normal eating customs, and even said that all food was okay and that everybody could eat it. And there was a controversy even with Peter, who's starting to reach the Gentiles, and he's sitting with them. And there are a number of individuals from the Jewish circle that Peter had been a part of, to where as he's eating with the Gentiles, he feels bad about it or embarrassed about it, or something happens where he pulls back, and Paul says, what are you doing? It's okay to do that. Why are you leaving them? Why are you fleeing from them? This is okay. Not that we have to be under the law, not that we don't have to be under the law, that we are under God's law. And in God's law, we do it this way. We reach those who need to know who Jesus Christ is. So much so, which is interesting, that even though Paul was acting as a Jew, he was also acting as a Gentile. That's one of the reasons he was persecuted, is because the Jews didn't think he was Jewish enough. And so they get frustrated with him in Acts 21:28, where it says, men of Israel, help. This is the man, talking about Paul, who teaches all men everywhere against the people, the law, and this place. And furthermore, he also brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place. Paul became like a Jew, but it wasn't good enough. He became like a Gentile. It wasn't good enough. Why did he do it? He didn't have to do it so that he could win some over. It's absolutely incredible. I read this and I'm just blown away by the intensity of what Paul was doing. He says, I'm doing this for the purpose that I'm not going to win all of them, which these passages right here prove one thing. You'll never make everybody happy. Don't try. But he says, I'm doing it for the purpose of what? Of some. That as they see me doing these things, that they will be won over. Paul then says that I've become weak like the weak, and he had talked about food, right? He said all food is fine. Go for it. But what if it causes someone to stumble? What if somebody has an issue with it? 1 Corinthians 8:13. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again, so I will not cause them to fall. Paul says, I'm willing to adjust to the individuals around me so that they may know the gospel, that they may know who they need to serve, not be trapped in the things that they are serving. Paul was doing this for a very specific reason. Now, was Paul doing something wrong in this? Was he going in a direction that he necessarily shouldn't have? No, because internally Paul wasn't changing. See, Paul says very clearly, I am under God's law, and so internally I'm the same person, but externally, I might be willing to do some things to adjust so people can see that I'm serious about who they are. Have you ever done that? Have you ever adjusted to your surroundings so that you could fit in better with the individuals that you needed to connect with? I've done that many times in my life. In fact, the first time that was very obvious to those around me was when I was in college. So I didn't get to play football. I never played football in college, but I did get to play basketball. And there's a basketball culture, best way to put it, right? There's a certain way of doing things when you play basketball. And so I fit into that culture pretty well for a time being. Why? Because I learned it. I engaged with it. I was a part of it. And I want to show you a picture of that time in my life. Take a look at this. Can you pick me out? Anybody know where I am? I'm not the guy wearing the lei. Nope, other side. This was the basketball team that I played on out in California, San Jose State. I know, feel bad for us. This picture was actually taken in Hawaii. I know, it's just awful, right? Part of my career, I got to go there 6 times. It was hard, but I was willing to do it for the sake of the game. But I had started to fit in. I became part of the culture, right? I wore a hat backwards, twisted to the side. At one point, I had the leg pull like LL Cool J. I'm not kidding. This was me. I had a little bit of a strut, right? There was a little bit of a walk, right? There was something that was there so I could fit in. And yet internally, had I changed? I like to think not. In fact, this was the stage of my life where I met my wife, who saw me with the hat twisted sideways, who saw me with the leg pull, with the arms, right? Guns out, right? All that good stuff. And she looked past it and said, hold on a sec. There's something more there internally. Yeah, you're right. Internally, I'm this guy that's trying to figure things out. Externally, I'm that guy. If you had known me at that time, you would never believe that I'd be here today. Not because I didn't love the Lord, not because I didn't have a passion for the gospel, but you probably would have looked at me and said, that guy's going to be a pastor? Paul says we need to adjust. We need to become like those we're trying to reach, not internally where we compromise, but maybe externally we need to do things so that we can know the people that we're trying to share who Jesus with, or Jesus is with. Paul points then in Philippians chapter 2 to the ultimate example of this man named Jesus. Paul says God himself took the very form of a human and came to this earth. See, Paul was describing exactly what Jesus had done. That God himself had come in the form of man. Why? So he could save us. So he could know us, so he could connect with us, so we would understand who he was. That the God of the universe submitted himself. That he came to serve and not be served, and didn't come with authority, but said, I will become like you so that I can save you. Paul says, I'm becoming like you. Why? For the sake of the gospel, so that some might be saved. Verse 23, I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. Success, as we think about it, is the gospel. Paul was very clear on why he was doing what he was doing. I was not so clear. I just wanted to be cool. And I was. Just letting you know. But Paul says that he had done this for the gospel so that he could share in its blessings, that he had gone and become like the Jews, the Gentiles, the weak, all these individuals because he was laser focused on it. I do all this for the sake of the gospel. But I want to land on this point for a second because I think it's very important, because I want to ask a question. Would the gospel had advanced as effectively if Paul hadn't done that? Would the gospel have advanced as effectively if Paul hadn't done what he had done? And I would argue the answer is no. That the gospel would not have spread as effectively if Paul hadn't done what he had done, because nobody would have listened to him. Because he needed to go and be with those that he was trying to reach. He needed to understand them, because if he hadn't understand them, would they have listened to him? And I would say they wouldn't have. Why do parents struggle telling their kids what to do? What's the number one response of teenagers to their parents? You don't understand me. You don't get it. As parents, have we ever tried to become teenagers again to understand our teens? No. Because we're like, no, you don't get it. And yet it's easy to take that approach. It's easy to say that I can look at individuals and say, hey, you need what I have, but unless I become them, are they ever going to listen to us? Unless I understand them, and not necessarily become them, like I said, internally, Paul was still under God's law, but unless I become like them, will they ever listen to me? I don't think they will. In fact, I think that's one of the reasons why Jesus needed to come. Because if God had just reached down into this planet and said, here's the answer, I don't think we would have listened. Because like our kids, we would have looked at God and said, you don't get it. You don't understand. I know you created me. I know you've been with me like my whole life. I know you've seen everything I've gone through. I know you understand my personality. I know you get all of my situation and circumstances. I just still don't think you understand. You just don't get it, God. So what did Jesus do? God, fully man, in the form of Jesus, came down to this earth, submitted himself to us, and said, I get it. I get it. Could God have saved us as effectively if Jesus hadn't come? Probably. There might have been another plan, but honestly, the way that I believe, I don't think there was a better plan. I think it had to happen that way because we then could sit there going, we have a Messiah that understands. We have a Savior that has gone through everything that we've gone through. That God himself loved us so much that he came to this earth to die for me, to serve me, so that I might be saved. So now think about yourselves and how powerful that would be for others around you as well. I love you so much that I will serve you as a slave to become like you so that you may be saved. I think at times we wrestle with this because where's the line between compromise and when I became the basketball culture, was there compromise in my life? Sure. Why? Because I wasn't intentional about it. I just did it because I was trying to fit in. I did it because that was the thing to do. Am I arguing that we need to go become like everybody else just to do it? No, not at all. But will the gospel be effective if we don't know the individuals that we're speaking to? And I'd argue it won't. If we can't understand them, if we can't know what they're going through, if we can't share in their situations and circumstances, we can't speak into their lives. Paul says, I do this for the gospel so that some might be saved. Jesus said, I will come to earth to save you in the form of you so that some might be saved. Why? For an eternal prize. Verse 24. Do you know that in a race, all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get that prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Success is about the gospel. It's about people. It's about eternity. Success is about eternity. It's about getting a prize that means so much more than any accomplishment in this world. And Paul says, I was willing to do everything so that by all means, people would know the gospel, that they would be saved. Why? Because at the end, there's a prize that I'm striving for. He says that he got a crown that would last forever, and he was probably talking about a crown, the one that would not last, in regards to the biennial games that were hosted near where the Corinthians were. Biennial games were a very large, very much like the Olympics, and every year they would have winners in multiple things. Paul says, you run the race, only one gets the prize. There was no first, second, and third. There were no participation trophies. There was only the one on top. And Paul says you need to run in such a way that you will be the one on top. And the prize that they got at the biennial games was this wreath. And they got to wear it around, and it was a sign of honor. And so they'd march through the streets wearing these wreaths because they were the very best. You know how long those wreaths lasted? A couple weeks, maybe a couple months, and then they disintegrated, and then they'd ramp up again. The biennial games were the second largest games at that time, only second to the Olympics, which, side note, anybody know when the Olympics originated? Anybody at all? Again, a free Bible up for grabs right now, if you can tell me. They believe it was 776 BC. That's pretty cool. And to this day, they still stand. There was a break. There were some other things. But Paul's saying you compete for a prize, but that prize is going to wither, but there's something more important. There's an eternal prize that you run for, that you compete for. And yet we think about success in our world today. Are we thinking eternity? Are we thinking salvation? Are we thinking about people? Are we thinking about trophies and plaques? You know how long it took me to find that plaque to take a picture of so I could use it as an illustration today? 45 minutes. I had to dig through a closet, pull out all these bins, shuffle through all the bins, which was fun because I found some things that I was like, oh, I haven't seen that in a while. Oh, man, I worked really hard for that. Oh. And it just hit even closer to home with this idea that we don't work for these things that fade. Who won the Super Bowl 3 years ago? How about the World Series? Anybody know? It fades. Paul was committed to sharing the gospel and reaching people for something way more than a plaque or a prize that would fade in this world, but for eternity, for a crown that would not fade. And here's a very important part of this passage. Verse 26, he says, therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. Success comes from being intentional. I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. One of the things with this passage specifically that I think people sit there going, well, if I become like this, I'll fall away. Or if I do this, or I go associate with that person, or if I do all of this stuff, I may no longer make it. You're right, you might not make it. Because when I become like the individuals that I need to reach, there is a fear that I'll actually become them, and we cannot do that. In order to be able to speak prophetically into something, we need to know it, but we can't become it. We need to know it, but we can't become it. And so Paul says here, though, I didn't aimlessly go into that. I didn't go hang out with these individuals just so I could look cool or just so I would fit in. He goes, I did it intentionally. I did not run without an end goal in mind. I'm not a boxer just beating the air. I did everything with intention. I went into this with the Jews, with the Gentiles, with the weak, knowing exactly what I was doing. I was not unprincipled, and I read a commentary that said this: every move he made was calculated in his pursuit of the prize. Every blow was meant to land squarely and send his opponent reeling. Paul says, I do this. I'm fighting this fight. I'm intentional in everything I do. I become like everybody because I want to knock the enemy out. I'm not willy-nilly just going into this. I am doing this for the purpose of, I love you, I want to serve you, I become a slave to you so that you could be won over, because there is something way greater than any plaque or trophy or anything that this world could ever offer us, and that's salvation, and I want you to know who Jesus is. So I will submit to you. I will become like you. Are we willing to do that? How many people will shave their heads right now? Are you with me? Matt Engstrom will. How many people would give up meat? Whoo, we live in a state that likes to hunt. How many people are going to give up meat? Ultimately, though, how many people will make that sacrifice intentionally because of the people that are around you? Nobody's ever gone out for a jog, unless you're Forrest Gump and just start running with no end. Right? You don't go to the gym and start hitting the bags without an idea of what you're trying to do. Paul said, I did all this intentionally. I did it on purpose because I wanted to win some for a prize that will last much longer than where I'm at now. He says, no, I strike a blow to my body and I make it my slave so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. I strike a blow to my body. I make it my slave so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. He was intentional, he was focused, he was driven because he knew what success was. Success is finishing well and having a lasting impact for the gospel. He was focused on others. He knew, though, that he had to make it to the end. That running the short races here wasn't good enough, that he looked at the end of his life and he said, I am doing this so when I get to the end, I am intentional with what I'm doing. I'm serving everybody so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. I believe this verse has hit home extremely close to many of us recently. If you've been watching the news at all, you see some of these things happening where you get to the end, you're so close, you've had successes along the way, and all of a sudden disqualification shows up because of something you were not intentional with. We can go down the list. I'm not going to call them out, but I know that every single one of you today, if you just read the news, you can see things where people were not intentional. Where as they ran the race, they got to the 7th inning, and man, they were winning, and then it fell off the rails. And yet what's exciting about the time that we live in today is that we actually have individuals that we can look at and say, you have done it. And I'm not one to look at the not, I'm one that looks at the do. Do this. Don't just focus on the negative, focus on the positive. Who are individuals that have done it well? We're a generation that saw Billy Graham. We're a generation that watched Billy Graham finish well. A generation that can sit here saying, there was a man that did it. There was a man that set the example. There was a man all the way to the end for his 95 years. Was he perfect? By no means, none of us are. Just recently, and I don't know where you stand politically, I don't know where this man was spiritually, but John McCain passed away. I would suggest you read about his life. And right here in our midst, we are watching somebody finish well. 42 years ago, John Chisholm helped start this church. 2 weeks ago, John had a heart attack at 83 years old. Fortunately, he made it to the hospital. They found a number of blockages. They couldn't do a stent or any of that stuff, so they had to cut him open. This past week, I had a chance to meet with John as he's recovering, doing well. He continues to need your prayers. But I asked him, John, can I share your story? Because you are a guy that is finishing well. You are a guy that has done it well. You are a guy that looked at every inning going, how am I going to attack this inning? How am I going to go after that? Is John perfect? By no means. Are there issues with every single one of us? Yes. And I will say that over and over and over again. And yet there are individuals in this life that we need to highlight to say, that is a way to do it. And I would stand here saying, John is one of those guys. You may not know John. You may have never met John, but this place has been impacted by John in ways that many of us will never even understand. And yet there are many of you in here that know exactly who I'm talking about, who know exactly the impact that he has had on you. And I tell you, share that with him. Let him know. Let everyone know that has impacted you, that thank you for what it was that you have done. John impacted me. I've known John for a year. That's it, a year. But I can tell you the very first time I met him, it was in a Skype interview for this position. I'm sitting there and I'm going around the table. Everybody's asking questions. We got to the end where there's an opportunity for me to ask questions. And so I asked 2 questions. I said, what's the reputation of New Life in the community? And what would you like it to be? And he honestly said to me at the time, he said, the reputation of New Life in the community is probably not very positive. But there have been a number of things that have been going on, and we're moving in the right direction, and our hope for the next lead pastors do X, Y, and Z, and he gave a very great answer. And then I asked, what do you want the reputation to be? And that's where John got real. And John said, I want the church to have a reputation that they will do whatever it takes to spread the message of Jesus Christ. That they will be a place that's on fire for the Lord, that they will look out at the world and say, we need to be there, that we need to be sent, that we need to be missionaries that are out all over the world sharing that gospel. I want it to be what it was 42 years ago now. And I heard the heart of New Life, and I went, I want to be a part of that. I want to be like John Chisholm. Now, maybe you're sitting here today going, I could never be like him. Well, I guarantee you 42 years ago, John Chisholm never thought he'd be John Chisholm. And that every single one of us in here today can be that. Can finish well, can have lasting impact because it starts today, right now. And as we look forward, what is success? Getting to that point and finishing well. John's no longer sharing the gospel with thousands. He's no longer on the elder board. He's no longer as active in the school as he once was. But he's right where he's supposed to be. Because if you know John, you know he's caring for one. And he's finishing well. Success doesn't mean you're always up here. In fact, you may be successful down here. We're not always going to end when we're up here. But how we end matters. And so our challenge as we leave today is this: that we will be a place that stays disciplined in reaching people for the sake of the gospel so that we will not be disqualified. Maybe like my life right now is a block of Swiss cheese with so many holes, I don't even know where to begin. Start right here. Get involved in a group. Become part of our cancer care ministry. Understand what your spiritual gifts are and take one step. Because before you know it, 42 years are gone. They're over. And in 42 years, what will they be saying about us? My prayer as I look ahead is they say that he was a man that finished well and had a lasting impact for the sake of the gospel. Let's pray. Lord, thank you. Thank you for who you are. You are so good, God, that you have given us your word, that you have given us these challenges